Hello, if you are new here, welcome. If you've been here for a while, welcome back. My name is Max. I write books under the pen name Gemma Tate, and these are all of the books that I read in January of 2025. Starting off strong, the first book that I read in 2025 was Lead Sister, The Story of Karen Carpenter by Lucy O'Brien. Yes, it's nonfiction. If you like 70s music, particularly those early days of 70s rock and roll, I highly recommend getting into the nonfiction of that era. Look into the histories of the artists, look into the histories of the albums. There's so much interesting material there that if you were not actually alive in the 70s, is fun and interesting to read about. I tried talking about it with my mom, and her take on it was that she basically watched Karen Carpenter die on live television as a kid and found it just too sad and depressing to read about, which, that's valid. There's a lot that I did not know about Karen Carpenter, which is shocking to me because of how much I like her music. Highly recommend. Book number 2 for the year was Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. If you've been paying attention, you know that that was my book club pick for January for the Burnout Book Club, which, side note, if you're not paying attention to that, I host a book club. We read a different book every month. The book for February is going to be a reread of The Princess Bride. Come hang out, watch that video when it's up. But Starling House, I really, really loved it. It's a good piece of deeply weird fiction talking about the horrors that the coal mining industrial complex has inflicted on certain parts of the South. And also, it's just deeply weird magical realism in the absolute best way. Number 3, Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. This book has been on my TBR for ages at this point. I've just been waiting for a copy to come up in Libby. It's incredibly depressing nonfiction about the state of this country and how we got here, and how the current iteration of conservatism that has taken over the Republican Party has reached this point. As a historian, I know, and I talk about it on here a fair amount, the iconography that we associate with modern republicanism, there's been quite a lot of co-opting over the years and quite a lot of determining that that was going to be the propaganda associations. So super, super interesting. And I think that in our current times, we owe it to ourselves to be as informed and educated as possible about the topics that we're seeing on the news every single day. The next one that I read was The Secret Hours by Mick Herron. That's the guy who wrote Slow Horses. If you've been into that show on Apple TV, goodness knows I have. And this is almost a prequel in some ways. It's very much a Jackson Lamb story, despite the fact that you never actually see him called Jackson Lamb on the page. Likewise, you get to know a lot about the character that we know as Molly in the show. She's in a wheelchair. She's very interesting. I love a good spy story. I really, really love a good old-fashioned just spycraft story, and this one absolutely nailed it for me. I read it on a plane, and I was just so totally immersed. It was a good time. I also read The Sweet Spot by Trish Dollar, which is just a fun little rom-com. If you are looking for a good little escapist bit of romance, it's a good time. Genuinely recommend. I read The Nature of Disappearing. I would say that I found it interesting. It was a good quick read. I, again, also read that one on a plane. It was something to do while I was on a plane. The Rules for Ghosting by Shelley J. Shore. I loved this book. It's a clever little gay rom-com. It is set in the Jewish community, which is that gets instant points for me. As a Jewish person, I don't get a whole lot of rom-coms that are set in my own community, and this one very much was. It deals so heavily with grief and moving on, and also what it is to be in love, and also what it is to have grown up as an eldest daughter, but what happens if later on in life you're no longer necessarily carrying all of those labels. It's a phenomenally interesting story about how we carry the weight of certain parts of life and also death, and how death is in many ways a part of life. And it's sweet and funny, and I really, really loved it. I confess, I think I'm getting old. I read an Ellen Hildebrand novel, and I liked it. God help us all. That said, the book was the 5-star weekend, and I had a great time. If you go into it acknowledging that these books, like the Gossip Girl books, if you were into those in their heyday, they're just gossip. But it's gossip about people that you don't know in real life, which makes you feel less bad about just consuming gossip for hours at a time, which is kind of fun. Like, that's the mentality that led me to getting 2 history degrees, is that all history is really just gossip if you look at it through the right lens. Not that this is in any way particularly highbrow, but like, it was a good time. And I'm not going to feel bad about it, especially because I also read The Hotel Nantucket by Ellen Hildebrand. I refuse to feel bad about this. It was a good time. Speaking of things that were a really good time, I read My Salty Mary by Cynthia Hand. If you've been here a while, you know that I really like a good, fun, funny, socially aware alternate history, especially if there's some magic. This is essentially what if the first female pirate / the first pirate queen was also the Little Mermaid, and it's a really good time. Like, it's such a good time. If you need just fun, escapist silliness, Cynthia Hand, that should be your go-to. Go with My Lady Jane, My Salty Mary, any of them. Towards the end of the month, I read Dating and Dragons, which is by Christy Boyce, who also wrote Dungeons and Drama, which I read last year and really liked. Sometimes we need a high school rom-com about D&D, okay? It made me happy. I also read Such Charming Liars by Karen McManus. I like a good heist. This was a good heist. Like, very Ocean's 8, very fun. I also read True Gretch, which is Gretchen Whitmer's sort of memoir. This kind of goes into that same mentality of, if you're going to be politically aware in this day and age, might as well know who the people are on the television screen or on your little phone screen. Forever interesting for me to learn things about public figures that I didn't grow up knowing a lot about. I also read The Next Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine. Listen, I liked The Last Mrs. Parrish. And I, as a rule, do not shit talk authors or their books. I will just say, everyone in those books needs to go to therapy. And I'm not convinced, based on the first book, that some of these characters would make choices as stupid as the ones that they make in the second book. The narrative does depend on them making those choices, so, like, I guess do it for the plot is the mentality here. Anyway, carry on. I read The Rom-Com Agenda by Jane Denker. It was fun. We all need a fun, silly rom-com in our lives at some point. Thought that one was a little contrived, but, like, doesn't change the fact that it was a good time. I also read Float Plan, also by Trish Dollar. There are 3 Trish Dollar books that I read over the course of January. The order is actually Float Plan, then The Sweet Spot, then Off the Map, which I also read this month. I really enjoyed all 3 of them. I really like a good series of rom-coms that all take place in an interconnected sense. So, like, the first book is one character's love story, and then the second book is the side character from that one's love story, and then the third book is, like, the best friend from the first one to the second one. Like, it's part of why I really liked these 3, because you get to see where the characters from the first one end up. The third one, Off the Map, mostly takes place over the course of the wedding of the couple from the first one, but it's about the best man and the maid of honor. Like, it's a good time, okay? We all need a little bit of fun in our lives, and reading rom-coms does the job. I also read Behind Every Good Man by Sarah Goodman Confino. And listen, very much like how I felt about Rules for Ghosting, it's set in my own community, really directly my own community in some ways. This one's literally set in the world of Judaism and politics in the part of Maryland that's just outside of DC, which is where I live. That said, this one is set in, I think, the 60s, and the premise is basically woman's political advisor husband cheats on her, so she helps his rival candidate win. Like, if you watched Scandal and the First Lady was your favorite character, you'll like this book. And finally, the last book that I read in January is up there for my favorite things that I read in January. I suspect it'll make it onto my favorite books of the year list. Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is actually given to me as a Secret Santa gift at the end of 2024. And the friend who gave it to me, I need to really properly thank her for this, because I loved this book. It's a Regency fairy tale. You get things like the bad guy walking onto the scene being like, "Look at me, I'm very important. I have a lot of expensive jackets on. Can't you tell that my expensive jackets are a symbol that I'm important?" And like fairies who are trying to play by the rules of British society, except that they don't actually know the rules of English society. They're basing everything on what they read in one magazine article one time. And it's all sort of set during the Napoleonic Wars, and so you get classic Regency romance tropes, but also classic fairy romance tropes. It's just so fun. In a lot of ways, it feels kind of like Terry Pratchett decided to write a Bridgerton novel. So hats off to Olivia Atwater. I really enjoyed this. I'm really looking forward to reading the second one in the series. What was your favorite thing that you read in January of 2025? Please let me know in the comments. Let me know what needs to go on my TBR for February. And as always, happy reading.